first of all, I disagree that there is a lack of figuring out what it costs to deliver services. Because I was the director of the Colorado Department of Revenue for 6 years under Governor Romer. And those were times that started out times of scarcity at the early 90s and ended up with a growing economy. But the combination of the Joint Budget Committee and the Governor's Office does require a lot of evaluation of how services are performed and how to effectively perform them. In the time I was there, we had a flat FTE count, but as the population grew in the 90s, the number of driver's licenses, the number of documents for taxes went soaring. So we had to figure out how to do that with the same resources.
But I don't see things that other states have done, including competitive contracting of services. In this state, for instance, in transportation, when a new person is hired to fill potholes, that becomes a state job and can never be contracted out. And that's part of the state constitution. I don't see reverse bidding for supplies so that we have open bidding. I don't see the type of taking a look at our assets to see what can be sold off. And there are a lot of those innovations that, you know, there's a good time to recessions as well. It's one of the few times that government is forced to find these innovations, and I'm excited about that. It's easier to raise taxes, though.
Well, we haven't raised taxes because obviously the voters have to raise taxes.
Yes, we have. We raised Ref C, which brought in billions of dollars more in taxes than otherwise would have happened.
It did bring in money that the voters agreed was necessary to maintain and restore essential functions of government.
We've also this year put in more revenue increases than I've ever seen in my life, from everything from the mill levy freeze, which will bring in billions of dollars over the years, to I think a very insulting car registration tax, which is called a fee. We could also talk about the new on roads, the new fees for tolling. Oh, we can go through fee after fee after fee. I forget how many fees came in this year.
There were, well, the one alone, the hospital, they call it the provider fee, or as
right, the 5% tax on every hospital stay.
Right, that's
fee. Excuse me.
$600 million, $500 million, something like that.
To say that there's, you know, that taxes are down. No, with Ref C taxes are up, and my wallet can't tell the difference between a fee and a tax. Government is getting more money this year than it got last year,
and they're doing more with it. They're doing more with it because the hospital provider fee, for example, is to pay for the uninsured, the medical population that's uninsured. The faster fee for vehicles is going to pay for repairing unsafe bridges.
But that assumes we are automatically spending correctly the first place, and that's where priority-based budgeting. Going back to, if you have priority-based budgeting, you're going to be able to take a better look at your state budget. If you prioritize and say this is where we have to be, and then below this we can't fund, and that's maybe where we do competitive bidding, or we contract for services or something like that. And speaking of, we're doing more with it. One of the questions I asked of the Colorado Department of Education is, we've seen this increase in K-12 spending. So what was the metric that was used to measure our performance? Do we have higher graduation rates and increased student achievements? And there really was no answer to that. So there might be some performance, but I don't think the public is seeing it.
Well, I think that I'm all for having government be as efficient as possible. That was my goal as the manager of the Department of Revenue, and also, something I think that Coloradans expect of government. So that's a given. In terms of, in the end, it comes down to what do people expect, and what do they want, and what do they feed back to their elected officials as priorities for them. And so, healthcare needs, that's a priority. Educational attainment is a priority, and I think Commissioner Jones said to us that they're in the process of collecting data individually, turning the CSAP test, the way I understood it, into being able to use that data more effectively for kids, so that you can determine what is working and what's not working. And he said it depends on the community, because I asked him a similar question. So I guess my overall point here is it's an overstatement to say that government doesn't care about performance outcomes.
No, and I wouldn't say they don't care about performance outcomes.
And doesn't do performance outcomes.
But in order to have true performance outcomes, there needs to be some choice. One of my frustrations are people in government who will hire more government employees. We've got a governor that brought in 1,300 new employees since he's been governor, a guy who's brought in collective bargaining agreements since he's been governor. And these are a lot of people who bring services into government, but when they get home at night, if they need some plumbing work done in their home, they will call 3 qualified plumbers and get bids and go with the lowest, most qualified. I want that same sort of accountability in government. Right now,
that's the general rule. The general rule is to do competitive bidding.
If that's the case, then why don't we have competitive bidding for instance, maintenance of highways? Because that cannot be contracted out. That takes a change of law. Will your commission take a look at the change of law for personnel reform so that those services can be taken out of state employees and put to a competitive bid process?
Well, I think that's a good point. And it is in the Constitution, the piece that you just said. Now, just a few years ago, the voters pretty widely rejected a reform of the personnel system.
And now that we have this deficit, will your consensus be to look at those things to find out how much we can put out to the private sector to get it done at a competitive cost?
Well, we haven't raised that specifically, but I would point out too that new construction is bid out for highways.
Yes, and maintenance is not.
Which is a big part of it, though.
Maintenance is not, and I'll bring it over here.
But you know what? What's going to be brought out in the commission? I have no idea. What we hope and what we expect are going to might be two different things. I don't. At this point, if I were a betting person, and I'm a lousy gambler, so I'm not, but I would say there will probably be a majority report and a minority report with two different suggestions on how we move forward. I could be wrong, but that's what I think probably will happen.
Let's talk about the big bugaboo, which is Tabor. And
that's not a problem.
That's not a problem. Referendum C lifted the restrictions off Tabor for 5 years, but it also did something else that people keep forgetting. As it said, whatever the fattest year of those 5 years, that's our new baseline going forward. So instead of ratcheting down, Ref C actually ratcheted up. I'm waiting to see, but I have a sense that there will be a Tabor recommendation here coming out. Care to make a prediction?
Well, there could be. I think that...
Come on, Renny. What do you want to see? You're one of those voting members. What is it you want to see?
Well, I think we need to continue the discussion of what are the needs. And really that can't be understated as an important thing, because I think Coloradans, they want to know what they're getting for their tax dollars, and they do want to have a discussion of where does this money go. And when Ref C passed, there was at least 51%, 52% that believed it should go to education, higher ed, and healthcare. So we have to lay the groundwork for that. Then I think there is a question of, well, if a revenue system doesn't sustain that, what revenue sources should be considered and debated? And we haven't had that debate in our committee. And next would be the Constitution. And I think I look at it in the sense of formulas, as Tabor being a formula. Amendment 23 is a formula. The tobacco tax is a formula. The expansion of gambling that goes to community colleges, that's a formula. In my view, all of those things need to be considered.
And after considered, where would you come down on that? I mean, my guess is you have a pretty strong opinion on this stuff.
Well, I want to have a Colorado that's going to be sustainable for the future and would even out some of these things that we're doing now with the ups and downs of our economy, and would place responsibility back with the legislature, who I think are accountable.
30 seconds left. Give me a prediction.
There will be something addressing Tabor. Tabor is not the problem at all. It hasn't been in effect since, 2001. It won't be for another 5 years. All Tabor does is says, this is how much you have. It's all the other spending mandates that handcuff the legislature, that tells them how they have to spend the money. That's the problem. It is not Tabor.
And my guess is that's not going to be addressed as much. Renny, I appreciate it. Amy, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you watching. Tell a friend. We'll see you next week right here on Independent Thinking.
Jab, bamboozle, nuke and noozle, bippity bop, she-go. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn it off.